Hello. I am your storyteller tonight. I know a lot of people come to this channel to help them fall asleep, but, if you're going to listen to this story before bed, I advise you to make sure, you really want to know how it ends. Because once you hear it, you'll carry it with you into your dreams. Before we begin, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Anne. I want to know, where are you, and what time are you watching? Now, lean back, dim the lights, and don't let yourself be distracted by any sounds around you. Because, that sound, still wakes me up every night. My name is Evan. If anyone asks me if I believe in the supernatural, the answer has always been, not really. I believe in things I can see, touch, and verify. The rest, I ignore. But that changed one January night, in Montana, when I started hearing knocking. My house was on the edge of Bozeman, a mile or so from the woods. That winter was unusually cold. Nighttime temperatures dropped to -25 degrees, and fog blanketed the ground, swallowing the yellow streetlights. I lived alone in the log cabin my grandfather had left me, with few neighbors. That evening, I was sitting at the kitchen table, holding a cold cup of coffee, when knock, 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 3 dry knocks came from the back door. They were steady, slow, and loud enough to drown out the howling wind outside. I stood up, following the swaying yellow light from the ceiling, and walked to the door. No one was there. Just darkness, fog, and a wooden fence about 20 feet from the house. Footprints? No. Unbroken snow. I closed the door, thinking it was the wood shrinking in the cold. But just a few minutes later, knock, 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 this time, the knock came from the front door. I opened it again, and again, no one. Just the snow-covered road, so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. I reassured myself and went back in, but I hardly slept that night. That knock kept repeating in my head, like the heartbeat of someone standing outside the door, waiting patiently. My name is Lucas. I'm in Michigan, nearly 1,300 miles from Montana, and I swear that the same night Evan heard the knocking, I heard them too. My home is in Marquette, a town on the shores of the Great Lakes. Winters are harsh here, but I'm used to it. I live with my girlfriend, Natalie, in a 2-story house. She's gone on a business trip to New York for 3 days, leaving me alone with our dog, Miso. That night, around 11:40, Miso started barking. She headed toward the front door, her hair standing on end. I turned off the TV and listened. Knock, knock, knock. 3 beats, steady, and I'm not kidding, they matched my heartbeat exactly. I looked through the peephole. No one was there. The porch light was on, the snow was falling hard, and the driveway was white. But there was one thing that made my blood run cold. At the edge of the yard, there was a circular depression of snow, the size of a dining table, completely flat, as if something very heavy had stood there. I didn't open the door. Instead, I stepped back, hugged Miso, and we sat in silence until the knocking stopped. But little did I know, that night was only the beginning. Back in Montana, 3 days later, I started to see climb the snow. They appeared a few meters from my door, no footprints leading to or from it. A compacted circle of snow, perfectly outlined, about 2 meters in diameter. At first, I thought it might be a prank, or a natural phenomenon. But upon inspection, I realized the snow inside the circle wasn't just compacting, it was disappearing, revealing the dry soil underneath, despite the sub-zero weather. I called the town sheriff. He came, looked at the circle, and said it was probably someone's fire, hidden by the snow. But I knew full well that no one had ever lit a fire there. And more importantly, the circle had just appeared last night, after the tapping. Lucas, Michigan. A week later, a similar circle appeared in the snow around my house. Natalie had just returned from a business trip, and when I pointed it out to her, she was speechless. Lucas, that's not a fireplace. It's too perfect. We measured, exactly 2 meters in diameter. No more, no less. And like in Montana, the snow inside disappeared completely, leaving dry brown grass like midsummer. That evening, the knocking came again. This time not just at the front door, but also at the back door. 3 knocks, then silence. 3 knocks, then silence. They were like a signal, and somehow, I felt, someone far away was hearing them at the same time as me. Montana, Evan. I started recording the tapping sounds with a tape recorder. And at 11:42 p.m. that night, I got a sound that made my hair stand on end. Not just 3 tapping sounds, but one breath very slow, very long, right at the door. When I slowed it down, I realized it sounded like someone inhaling through clenched teeth, as if they were trying to hold back cold, or anger. Lucas, Michigan. I tried something crazy. I set up the tape recorder on the front porch. When I played it back, I heard exactly what Evan heard in Montana, even though I never knew him. 3 taps, and the sound of breathing through clenched teeth. Only one thing is different. In my recording, after the breathing is a very small whisper, almost enough for intuition to recognize. I see. From Montana to Michigan, 2 places thousands of miles apart, but we, 2 strangers, were being walked to the door by something. And the circle in the snow was getting closer and closer. I don't remember exactly when I fell asleep, but when I opened my eyes, everything in the room was darker than usual, as if the moonlight was covered by an invisible hand. The digital clock on the bedside table flashed numbers .2:11, but what stunned me was that the second hand was running, backwards. I propped myself up on my elbows, tilting my head to make sure I wasn't seeing things. The red glow of the digital numbers slowly drifted down, 2:11, 2:10, 2:09. There was no ticking, just a silence so thick I could hear my blood rushing through my ears. I sat up and tried to turn on the desk lamp. The switch clicked. Cup, but there was no light. Everything was still dark, and from somewhere, in that dim space, a soft knock sounded. Case, case, case. The knocking was steady, but it wasn't coming from the door or the window. It was coming from under the floor. I pressed my ear to the carpet, my heart pounding. Below, I heard footsteps slowly shuffling. Just one person. No, it could have been several, but their steps were eerily synchronized, like a chorus of flesh and bone. I was about to shout, but my throat tightened. And then, at that moment, the digital clock on the table jumped to 2:12. Already 2:13, as if never reversed. I had taped the crack in the basement door shut, but the echo still crept up. It wasn't the wind, nor was it a bug. It was my voice. I know you hear me. The sound coming from the basement was a little lower than my real voice, but every pause, every vibration of the vowel, was mine. I stepped back, swallowing the nausea. There was no one else in the house, the doors were locked, and I had never used a tape recorder in here. And yet the voice continued. Come down here, I have something to show you. I turned on my flashlight, and the light swept across the wooden stairs. No one was there. But on the 4th step from the top, there was a deep indentation, as if someone had been standing there for a long time. A musty smell rose up, accompanied by a feeling of pressure, like the air was heavier, pushing me inch by inch towards the hatch. I was about to leave, but the next sentence from the basement made my legs freeze. Evan is hearing me too. I don't know who Evan is. The next morning, I opened my email. A new message, no sender, just an address showing a string of meaningless characters. The subject line, he heard it too. There was no greeting in the email, just an audio file attached. I opened it, and almost dropped my coffee when I heard the same footsteps on my floor last night. Every beat, every tap on the wood, exactly the same. At the end of the file, a man's voice speaks, his accent slightly different from mine. I'm Lucas. If you get this, respond immediately. I never knew who Lucas was. But one thing made my blood run cold: I never told anyone about those footsteps. That morning, I also received an email. Subject line: I hear you. Inside was a recording. Heavy breathing, then my voice, but not the one from the basement yesterday. It was me screaming in a dream I had, about 3 weeks ago. A dream I'd never told anyone about. And at the end of the file, a strange voice rang out. I'm Evan. Do you see the time reversal? We began exchanging emails. At first, it was just a few short questions, then it became longer. It took less than a day for us to realize that what we were seeing and hearing were happening in parallel, more than 1,000 miles apart, but exactly the same in every detail. And then, one night, as I was composing a reply, I heard a knock on the door. 3 sounds, stop, 3 sounds, stopped. I glanced out the window, no one. But when I returned to my computer screen, the chat with Lucas had a new line. Lucas, did someone just knock on your door? Before I could reply, another message appeared, not from Lucas, but from the same meaningless email address. Open the door. Both of you. Evan. I don't know how long I slept. It felt like I had only dozed off for a few minutes, but when I opened my eyes, the light coming through the curtains had turned a dense gray, unclear whether it was dawn or dusk. The clock on the bedside table said 5:47, but the second hand was running backwards. I pushed myself up into a sitting position, blinking away the illusion. The clock's hands ticked, but instead of a steady tick, it sounded like a knock on the door, each beat, slow, deliberate. The sound stopped as soon as I hit the floor. The air in the room felt heavy, as if everything, including me, was being pulled down. I looked toward the corner of the room, where my mother's old armchair still stood. A dark shadow stretched across it, lengthening like a stretched shadow. I was about to step forward when the phone rang. The screen showed an unfamiliar number, Michigan area code. Lucas. When I heard footsteps on the ceiling, my first instinct was to think of a mouse. But the sound was so deliberate. The rhythm of each step was like someone was considering each step. I paused for a few seconds, then grabbed the flashlight and shined it on the ceiling. Nothing. I climbed onto the chair and pressed my ear to the board. It wasn't just footsteps, there was whispering, as if 2 people were talking, but in my voice. The sentence I heard most clearly was, "He is listening." The phone on the table vibrated, the screen showing an unfamiliar number, Montana area code. Evan. I picked up the phone. Excuse me, who is it? The other side was silent for a few seconds, only heavy breathing could be heard. Do you see that your shadow is longer than usual? I stood frozen. That voice was mine. No, more accurately, it was another version of me, hoarse, more tired. I hung up immediately. But when I looked at the screen again, it still showed that I was on a call. The countdown was running backwards. Lucas. Before I could say anything, the other party hung up, but the sound continued to echo in my ears. The whispering now used not only my voice, but also the exact description of the room I was in. I looked around, trying to find something that could produce sound, but there was no speaker, no recording device. And then, the phone rang again. Unfamiliar number, but this time there was no area code. Just a jumbled string of numbers, 5 hours 47 minutes and 53 seconds. Evan. The phone fell from my hand. The bedroom door creaked open, though I was sure it was locked. A cold wind blew in, carrying the smell of damp wood and something like rusted iron. I backed away, but the shadow from the corner of the room had already begun to slide across the floor, crawling toward me. Suddenly I shouted into the void. Who are you? And somewhere, far away but seemingly right next to his ear, a voice answered. We are the same person. Evan. I stood frozen. The darkness on the floor no longer felt like the shadow of a concrete object, it was alive, it was breathing. I could hear the wind passing through it somewhere, but the room was too sealed for it to be. I took a step back, the darkness retreated. I moved forward, it moved forward. I tried picking up the phone again. The screen was black, but when I put it to my ear, there was a tapping sound, just like the clock hands had been, steady but with each beat accompanied by a whisper, and the voice was counting down. Lucas. I got out of my chair, trying to be as quiet as possible, but the floor groaned as if to betray me. The flashlight's light flickered, even though the battery was full. I turned toward the window, and almost screamed. Outside, on the opposite floor, was a dark doorway. But in that darkness, someone was standing. A slender figure, head tilted to one side, and eyes, glowing a milky white. I blinked. The figure disappeared. But then the phone vibrated again. Evan. The countdown stopped at 3. All the sounds around me disappeared, including my own breathing. The air became so thick that I had to open my mouth to swallow. And then, from the other end of the phone, a clear voice rang out. Open the door. I don't know why, but my hand went to the doorknob as if I had no choice. The door creaked open. The hallway outside was longer than usual. So long that I couldn't see the end. The fluorescent light was uneven, some parts bright, some dark, and at the end of each dark stretch, I had the feeling that someone was standing. Lucas. When I picked up, no one answered. There was only the sound of wind, but it sounded like wind blowing through a very long pipe. Then a broken voice, like it was playing from an old cassette tape, rang out. Don't enter a hallway when it is longer than usual. I clutched the phone. Who is it? It doesn't matter. Just, don't let him see you. Before I could ask more, the line was disconnected. But that statement immediately made me think of Evan. For some reason, I felt like he was doing the opposite of what he had warned me to do. Evan. I walked step by step on the floor, the sound of my shoes echoing like falling into a deep well. Every time I passed a dark section, the feeling of someone walking right behind me became more obvious. I spun around. No one was there. But at the end of the hallway, where the light was just beginning to flicker, there was a silhouette that looked like Lucas. I called, Lucas? Is that you? The figure paused. And instead of answering, it bowed its head, then tilted it to one side in an unnatural way, almost breaking its neck. Lucas. In my room, the lights went out. When they came back on, I found myself no longer in the apartment. I was in a long hallway, just as the voice had described. But what sent a chill down my spine was this: about 10 meters away, I saw Evan, staring at me. I opened my mouth to call out, but no sound came out. The air here was thick, choking all sound. Evan started walking toward me, but his movements were jerky, like a movie that had been fast-forwarded and then stopped abruptly. Evan. I realized something was wrong. Lucas's face wasn't right. His eyes were dark, not reflecting any light. As I moved closer, his mouth began to move, but the sound that came out was mine. Come back, now. A cold hand was placed on my shoulder from behind. Lucas. I couldn't move. I just saw Evan being grabbed by the shoulders by someone, or something, and dragged backward into the darkness. Footsteps echoed, then stopped. The light in the hallway gradually dimmed, starting from where Evan stood, moving towards me. Evan. That night in Montana was longer than usual. I sat in the kitchenette, holding a cold cup of coffee, looking out the window at the empty fields, seeing only pitch blackness. No lights. No sound of cars. Just the wind whistling, as if trying to push something closer. The neighbor's dog started barking again. Not the kind of barking that would warn of a stranger's approach, but a constant growl, interspersed with silences, as if they were listening for something I couldn't hear. I tried turning off all the lights in the house and stood close to the glass door. The silence outside seemed to die with me. And then, somewhere out of sight, a small light, like someone moving with a weak flashlight. But who would be walking around at this hour? The light blinked a few times, then went out. Lucas. In Michigan, I could still feel the sound of my phone call with Evan lingering in my ears, even after I hung up. The way he paused for a few seconds before speaking, it sounded like he was standing in front of something unnameable. I picked up my toolbox and walked out to the garage. The old radio hanging on the wall was making a faint static noise. Strangely, it wasn't on. I brought my hand closer and the crackling sound turned into a whispering sound right next to my ear. "Don't open the door." I stood there, frozen. No one was there. No draft. But when I turned to look at the garage door, I saw that it was ajar, even though I distinctly remembered locking it from the inside. Evan. I couldn't sleep, just lying there listening to the dry ticking of the wall clock. Occasionally there was a small crack in the roof, as if someone was walking slowly. I tried to blame it on the wind, but the wind didn't make such regular footsteps. By the time I decided to step out onto the porch to investigate, a pungent, metallic smell hit my nose. The smell of blood. No one was there. Just a few wet spots on the wooden floor, reflecting the pale moonlight. I bent down, and realized it wasn't rain. Lucas. I slammed the garage door shut, locked it, and sat in the living room with all the lights on. But the light didn't make me feel any safer. On the table, a paper calendar fell out, open to today's date. There was a faint pencil mark in the corner, not my handwriting. 11:47, don't be alone. I looked at my watch. 11:39. Lucas. I couldn't remember where I left my phone, but when I tried to find it, the lights in the room suddenly flickered. This time it wasn't a normal electrical short, but every time the light flickered, I saw images that didn't belong in my room. For a split second, I saw an old kitchen with stained wooden walls, a tilted clock, and the pungent smell of blood almost in my throat. Then the light returned to normal. It suddenly hit me, that kitchen was Evan's home. Evan. I wiped my hands on the towel hanging in the kitchen, but the red felt like it was stuck deep into my skin. There was no more barking, but instead there was something far away, a steady, metallic clanking, like a chain being dragged. I tried calling Lucas, but it was busy. I tried again. Still busy. And then, my phone rang. The screen showed the name, Lucas. I picked up, but all I heard was very slow, very long breathing, like someone trying not to reveal their presence. Not a word. I called, "Lucas?" The breathing stopped. There was a perfect silence, making me feel like someone was listening from very close, so close that I could imagine the warmth against my ear. Lucas. 11:45, I heard my phone ring in the bedroom. But I didn't want to go in. The bedroom door was ajar, and from the crack, a faint light came out that wasn't like my light. It was more yellow, like the glow of an old incandescent bulb. The phone kept ringing. I walked slowly toward it. With each step, the ringing seemed to get farther away, even though I was clearly getting closer. When I pushed the door open, the room was empty. No phone. No lights. Just a mirror standing high up near the ceiling, reflecting me, and behind me the shadow of a man leaning down close to my ear. Evan. I locked the front door, but when I turned around, the bedroom door was wide open. I was sure it had been closed. Inside, all the curtains were drawn, and there was a long scratch across the floor, as if someone had dragged a sharp object across the wood. The phone on the table vibrated violently, the screen lit up. No incoming calls. Only one new message. 11:47, stand still, don't turn around. Light footsteps sounded right behind me. Evan. I stood there, stunned. My eyes were on the phone screen, but my mind was blank, as if all the sounds and images around me had been drained away. Only my heartbeat remained, fast, pounding, then stopping. I didn't turn around. But in that moment of stillness, I sensed more clearly than ever, there was someone behind me. Not the standing kind, but a presence crouching close, like an animal sniffing its scent to confirm that its prey was alive. A slow, warm breath crept up the back of my neck. I swallowed. And then, the feeling was gone. I took a deep breath and turned around. The room was empty. But the scratch on the floor, it was longer than before, reaching all the way to the corner of the room, where the closet door was ajar. Lucas. 11:48, I was still standing in front of the mirror. The figure behind me didn't move, but I noticed one detail. The shadow did not align with me. Not in the same direction, not in the same rhythm. When I tilted my head, it stayed still. When I blinked, it did not blink. I took a step back, about to turn around when the shadow moved its lips. No sound was made, but I read the sentence through the movement. There is not much time left. A chill ran down my spine. I closed my eyes, counted to 3, and opened them. I was alone in the mirror. But it wasn't my room, it was Evan's living room, just as I'd seen it in the flickering light. And Evan was standing there, staring into a half-open closet door. Evan. The phone vibrated again. This time it was a video call. Caller, Lucas. I pressed accept. The screen showed Lucas's face, but the image was choppy, blurry, and dark. He was saying something, his lips moving rapidly, but the sound came out as static like a radio with bad reception. I tilted the screen, straining to listen, and in the flickering light, I realized behind Lucas was the room I was standing in, with the wardrobe ajar. Only one difference: in the screen, the closet door was wider open, and inside was a deep, dark space, reflecting nothing but a pale white hand clutching the edge of the door. Lucas. I saw Evan in the mirror. He held up his phone, looking at me as if he was trying to listen. But I knew, between us, it was no longer a normal video call. I saw. I was there, right next to him, standing against the closet door. And the hand holding the edge of the door wasn't mine. It was thin, long, and had dull gray nails. I wanted to warn Evan, but when I opened my mouth, a crackling sound came out of my lips. Exactly what he was hearing. Evan. The cabinet door suddenly shook, so hard that I jumped back. Lucas on the screen rolled his eyes, raising his hand as if to signal. Then, everything went black. The screen went black. The lights in the room went out. I stood in complete darkness, save for the sound of my own breathing. But no. Not just mine. There was another breathing, slower, deeper, right in the closet. And it was coming closer. Lucas. The mirror had a small crack starting from the left corner, slowly spreading downward. Through the crack, I saw Evan backing toward the door, his eyes fixed on the cabinet. I pressed my hand against the mirror. Evan. No sound came out. But Evan suddenly turned to look straight at me, not at the phone screen, but straight across the distance, like he could see me standing there. He moved his lips, very slowly. It is behind you. I turned around. Evan. The night in Montana was colder than usual. I stood by the window, looking out at the dark fields, seeing only the silvery moonlight on the thin layer of snow. Everything was so quiet that I could hear my own breathing. But then, far away, I heard a sound, like metal dragging across frozen ground. A slow, steady, unhurried sound, as if it knew I was listening. I turned away from the window, not wanting to look outside any longer, but my heart was still pounding with each pull. Suddenly, I realized that in my coat pocket, there was something. I was sure I hadn't worn this coat tonight. When I reached in, my fingers touched a cold piece of metal, a rusty key, large and heavy, the kind that hadn't been used for a long time. Attached to it was a small piece of paper, scribbled, Bay 7. I've never heard of Bay 7 around here. But I know Lucas mentioned it. I just don't remember the context. Lucas. I sat in the garage, the fluorescent light on the ceiling flickering, as if it were about to burn out. On the workbench, the old walkie-talkie gave a short whine. I hadn't used it in a long time. But this time, it wasn't just a whine. A hoarse voice spoke slowly, as if sliding through layers of metal. Evan. Flight 7. Tuesday. I was startled, wondering how the person on the other end of the line knew his name. No one but us knew about our small talk, and Evan and I had never even told anyone. As I reached to turn off the radio, all the lights in the garage went out, leaving only a faint light from outside. And in that darkness, I saw a figure, standing right in the middle of the door, tall and thin, completely motionless. Both Evan and Lucas, in two different states, are holding the same puzzle piece, Bay 7. One had the key, the other heard the call. Neither understood what the third hour meant, but both felt the same thing, an invisible, heavy pressure, as if pulling them toward a single point. When Evan's clock read 2:57 a.m., and Lucas's clock read 2:57 a.m., a sound rang out simultaneously in both places, the sound of large metal door turn on slowly. Everything went dark. Evan. When the clock is right 3:00 a.m., the sound of the metal door didn't just ring in my ears, I felt like it was right in front of me. There was no door in the bedroom, just the familiar pale gray wall. But when I blinked once, there was a dark outline on that wall, as if someone had drawn a door frame in shadow. I stepped closer, my hand unconsciously tightening around the rusty key in my pocket. The dark outline seemed to tremble slightly, and when I placed my hand on it, a chill ran down my spine. It didn't feel like temperature, it felt like I had touched an alien thought, straight into my head. For some reason, I pressed the key into the darkness. A loud click was heard. The darkness parted, opening a narrow space just enough for me to walk through. Inside was a long, damp, empty metal chamber, the smell of rust mixed with the smell of old mold. There was no light, but I could still see every scratch on the floor. At the end of the compartment, a figure turned its back to me, completely motionless. Lucas. I stood still in the dark garage, the figure not moving. I took a step back, but the footsteps did not match my own. Every time I lifted my foot, there was another, slower, heavier, echoing off the concrete floor. The walkie-talkie on the table suddenly lit up again, this time it wasn't a hoarse voice, but a breath. Heavy, drawn out, like someone was standing right next to the speaker. Then a sentence, extremely clear. Open Bay 7. I had never heard of Bay 7, but as the light from outside filtered through the cracks in the garage door, I noticed on the wall, next to the tool rack, a large metal door, one that I could swear had never been there before. On the surface of the door, the paint was peeling, revealing cold steel, and right in the middle, was a giant lock. In my jacket pocket, I felt something heavier. I reached in, and pulled out a key that matched the description Evan had sent me a picture of a few months ago, when he said he'd found a strange object. I'd never touched it before, but now it was in my hand like it had always been there. As the key turned, the garage door disappeared. In its place, was the same long, damp, dark metal compartment Evan had been standing in. And at the end of the compartment, a figure turned away, completely still. I, Evan, slowly walked closer to the figure, and realized, my footsteps blended with another sound from behind. I, Lucas, took a few more steps, feeling the distance hadn't changed, even though I had walked for a long time. Then, the figure slowly tilted its head, but in no clear direction. The messy black hair covered half of its face, and when it moved slightly, the dim light in the cabin seemed to disappear completely. There was no more sound, no more distance, only a heavy presence, pressing against the two chests as if to suffocate. A whisper echoed in both of their heads at the same time. The third hour has begun. Evan stood still for a long time after the last noise. The silence returned, but this time it was not the quiet of the Montana mountains, but as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. He realized his hand was still gripping the folding knife so tightly that his knuckles were white. He looked up. The clock on the wall in front of him no longer read 2:14, as it had the last time he had looked. The minute hand was still there, but the hour hand was moving backward, a slow circle, clicking every time it passed a number. There was no reason for it, and he couldn't look away. The desk lamp flickered on. In that moment of darkness, Evan saw a figure standing against the wall in the corner of the room, facing him. When the light came back on, the corner was empty. He didn't sleep. He just sat there, staring into the darkness, until the first light of morning crept through the window. But the light didn't make him feel any safer. It only made the scratches on the window frame, which he was sure he'd never seen before, more visible. They looked like someone had scratched them from the outside, deep and crooked. Lucas woke at 3:11 a.m. to a knock on the door. 3 times. Then no more. 3 more. He thought it was the drunken neighbors, but when he looked through the peephole, the hallway was empty. The coldness of the doorknob made him pull his hand back. It was as cold as metal in a freezer. He turned, but before he could take a third step, the knock came again. This time it was from inside the apartment, from his bedroom door. He stood still, heart pounding in his ears, listening. Each tap was slow and steady, as if someone were being very patient. And between each tap, he heard something else, breathing. But not the rapid breathing of someone in a panic. But a long, deep, deliberate breath. Lucas stepped back, eyes fixed on the bedroom door. He had a feeling that if it opened, things would never be the same again. But then, there was no more sound. Only the hum of the refrigerator in the corner of the kitchen. He was about to turn away when he realized, the bedroom door was slightly ajar. And from that dark crack, 2 tiny dots of light reflected the light from the hallway, like the eyes of a lurking animal. Lucas couldn't remember where he'd hidden, but he knew that when morning came, the bedroom door was still open, and everything in the room was intact, except for a neatly folded piece of paper placed in the middle of the bed. On the paper, there were only 3 words, written in scribbled handwriting, "I'm coming." Evan left the house in the early hours of the morning. He couldn't bear to stay another night, but he didn't dare call anyone, not knowing how he would explain. The dirt road to the highway was still wet from the rain the night before. Each step left a distinct mark, but when he turned around, he realized, there was only one set of footprints. There was no trace of him when he arrived. His phone had no signal. His flashlight was running low on battery. And every time the wind blew, he heard a faint sound, like someone muttering behind him. But when he turned around, there was only the silent pine trees. Miles away, Lucas had yet to leave his apartment. Morning light was streaming in, but the hallway outside seemed shrouded in a thin layer of fog. He had never seen fog in this building before. When he stepped out to investigate, his footsteps echoed unnaturally, a sound that repeated itself a beat after he had stopped, as if someone were imitating him. Lucas was about to turn around when he saw a white envelope neatly placed in front of the apartment door across the street. This apartment had been vacant for a long time, the door always locked, covered in dust. He didn't intend to open it, but his hands did otherwise. Inside the envelope was a blurry photo, taken in the hallway, but in the middle of the photo was himself, standing where he was now, and behind him, in the photo, was a tall, thin man in a dark coat, his face in shadow. For some reason, Lucas was sure Evan had never met him, but that man stood right between the two of them, like a connecting point. Somewhere, at the same time, they both recognized the matching signs, the knocking, the breathing, the eyes in the dark, and realized that what was coming to them needed no door, nor did it need a path. The morning sky was a thick blanket of gray, making Evan feel like he was walking through a time-worn landscape. He left the house as the first rays of light broke through the clouds. The ground was damp, the mud clinging to the soles of his shoes. Each step left a distinct mark, but when he looked back, there was only a long line of footprints. There was no trace of him when he came here. The phone was still dead. The flashlight in his other hand flickered weakly. The wind blew through the pines, carrying the scent of rotting earth and something like rusted iron. Every now and then, Evan heard a faint whisper behind him. It was unclear whether it was the wind or a voice trying to hold back. He turned, but behind him was only the silent trees. He tried to keep his breathing, focusing on the exit to the highway. But the road seemed to lengthen as he went, the curves seemed to repeat themselves, and the scenery on both sides began to look uncomfortably similar. Evan tried to mark his path by sticking a branch into the ground, but when he turned back a few minutes later, the branch was gone. Elsewhere, miles away, Lucas had yet to leave his apartment. Morning light filtered in through the blinds, but the hallway outside was shrouded in an unusually thin layer of fog. He had never seen fog in this building before. When he stepped outside to investigate, his footsteps echoed strangely, not just echoing, but repeating themselves, as if someone were walking right behind him, mimicking his every move. Lucas stopped. The second footstep stopped too. He turned quickly, but the hallway was empty. In front of the door of the apartment opposite, which had long been vacant and locked, there was a white envelope. The dust on the floor was disturbed by a single shoe print, small and long, like that of a very tall and thin person. Lucas did not intend to pick it up, but his hand reached out automatically. Inside the envelope was a blurry photograph of this very hallway, and in the middle of it, Lucas was standing, exactly where he was standing now. But what made his blood run cold was that behind him in the photo, just a few feet away, was a tall, thin man in a dark cloak. His face was in shadow, but his eyes seemed to be looking straight through the photo, right through the real Lucas. Evan continued walking, and this time he saw a small wooden house up ahead, one he could have sworn hadn't been there when he'd walked in last night. The door was ajar, and it was dark inside. But a dim light came from a picture frame hanging crookedly on the wall. As Evan stepped inside, he realized it was a blurry, black and white photograph of a long hallway. At the end of the hallway stood a young man with his back turned, and the light from the ceiling lamp illuminated his silhouette. Evan knew, instinctively, that it was Lucas, even though he'd never seen him or heard his name. At the same time, Lucas held the photo he had just received and felt his hand go cold. He put the photo on the table, intending to take a picture with his phone, but when he turned on the phone, the screen showed a completely different image, a small wooden house, the door ajar, and a man, Evan, standing inside, staring at the camera, as if he realized he was being watched. Lucas dropped his phone in surprise. As he bent down to pick it up, he heard a knock on the door, 3 slow, even beats. Not his own, but the empty apartment across the street. The knocking repeated. And this time, he felt the doorknob turn slightly, even though he knew the inside had been sealed for years. Evan stepped closer to the painting in the cabin, and the moment he was about to touch the frame, the entire room vibrated with a deep rhythm, like the sound of machinery starting up underground. The light in the frame grew brighter, and then the image inside began to move. The man with his back turned, Lucas, started to turn around. For a split second, Evan realized the face was looking straight at him, through the glass, but the gaze wasn't of a person, but of something behind them both, controlling both him and Lucas like puppets in a show they never agreed to participate in. A small pop went off in Evan's head, like a circuit breaking. The lights went out. When he blinked, he was in the middle of a hallway, the same hallway from the photo, long and winding, the ceiling lights flickering, and at the end of the hallway, Lucas was standing, frozen, as if he'd been there before Evan had even seen him. The air still smelled of mold and smoke, a strange mixture Evan couldn't remember smelling before. He leaned against the cold wall, feeling his heart pounding like a stake in the empty room. The darkness in the hallway seemed to thicken with each breath. There was no wind, no footsteps, but somewhere, something was watching. Lucas's voice came from the darkness in the distance, not loud but enough for Evan to notice something was off. It wasn't quite Lucas's voice, it was like it was being filtered through a thin layer of glass, making the timbre dull and drawling at the end of the sentence. "Evan, the door, behind you." Evan turned quickly. At the end of the hall, an old wooden door stood ajar, though he distinctly remembered it being locked when they arrived. A cold draft seeped through the crack, carrying with it the smell of wet ashes. He walked forward, but each step felt like he was doubling over, the floor creaking as if it were carrying a weight other than his own. Lucas, from across the house, he felt the pressure in his ears increase, as if he were diving deeper underwater. The walls around him seemed to be breathing, the wallpaper peeling away in patches, revealing the dark wood underneath. For a moment, he saw marks etched into the wood, not words, but strange, crooked symbols, as if scratched with fingernails. When he blinked, they were gone, leaving only normal cracks. One Horclicum from the cellar door they had never opened. Lucas knew Evan was at the other end of the hall, but instinct told him to go. His hand touched the cold handle, and the cellar door swung downwards, silent on its hinges. The stench of dampness rose up, thick as a curtain. Evan reached the open door, pushed it open gently. Inside was a small room, just enough for a wooden chair and a tall dusty mirror. But what made him freeze was the reflection in the mirror. He was still standing in the doorway, but in the reflection, Lucas was standing right behind him, close enough to whisper in his ear. Evan whirled around. No one was there. Just an empty hallway and an all-consuming darkness. He turned to look in the mirror, the reflection had changed. Now the empty chair in the mirror was occupied by someone, head bowed, wet hair dripping onto the floor. Lucas, from the basement, suddenly heard the sound of dripping water, but could not see the source. When he looked up, he realized that each drop was falling from above his head. Right on the ceiling, a blurry figure was approaching. Its face was broken but its black eyes were still wide open. The drops fell on his forehead, cold as ice. He stepped back, but the basement door had already slammed shut. Live above Evan touched the mirror. The surface was cold, but no longer reflected properly. Instead, he saw another hallway, dark, where Lucas was staggering back. And behind Lucas, something crawled out of the dark corner, fast and low, its joints making a cracking sound. Evan punched the mirror, calling Lucas's name. Inside, Lucas's image looked up, mouth open to say something, but from the mirror, only a soft hissing sound came out like an endlessly drawn-out breath. Already all dark. Darkness enveloped the old house, and only Evan's heavy breathing echoed down the long hallway. He leaned against the cold wall, trying to calm himself, but each breath felt like a strain in the thick air. The acrid smell of damp ash still clung to every crevice, reminding him of sleepless nights when the darkness seemed to swallow his soul. Across the room, Lucas lay on the basement floor, the flickering flashlight illuminating strange markings on the walls, deep claw marks, carving out strange shapes he couldn't quite make out. Every knock, every sigh in the darkness made his heart clench, and the cold seeped into his flesh. Evan approached the cellar door, trying to call out to Lucas. His echo was met with a deafening silence, as if an invisible curtain had fallen between the two worlds. Suddenly, a sharp intake of breath sounded from inside. Lucas, or something impersonating him, was struggling in the darkness. Evan pushed the door open, but it remained firmly closed, defying the force. In a panicked moment, he sensed a presence nearby, amber eyes in the darkness, unblinking, watching his every move. Down in the basement, Lucas felt an invisible pressure choking the air around him. Whispers echoed in his head, not sure if they were human or something else. He tried to get up, but each step felt like stepping on quicksand, losing strength. Suddenly, a pale light appeared from a small crack in the ceiling, shining down on the cracks in the wall. In the dim light, the image of a giant, skinny hand with long claws appeared, as if trying to reach for him. Evan ran around the house, trying to contact Lucas, but the phone had no signal, the radio only emitted a whining sound. The familiar ticking sound echoed from the yard, the small stones continued to be arranged in strange geometric shapes, seemingly sending a message he could not decipher. Each stone placed was a heart-wrenching, a warning that could not be ignored. The darkness became more vivid, shadows moving just out of sight, lurking in every dark corner, passing through the window glass like indelible stains. Evan felt as if he were being watched by an ancient entity, conscious and terrifyingly patient. He stepped out into the yard, the smell of damp earth mixed with the acrid scent of ashes to form a bitter, haunting aroma. Lucas searched for a way out of the basement. Each door he opened led to a different dark corridor, like the endless maze of a nightmare. The double knocks rang out, a constant rhythm in his head, reminding him of something undiscovered, a secret lurking just beyond his reach. He began to hear footsteps that were not his own, walking beside him, always a few steps ahead. Every time he turned around, he saw only darkness. Meanwhile, Evan discovered a small box placed under the old oak tree in the yard. Inside was a broken mirror and 3 granite stones, 3 familiar stones, arranged in a perfect triangle. Suddenly, the sky above him was gray, the wind blew in gusts of cold like an icy hand touching his skin. A sigh whistled through the leaves, and Evan knew that the worst had not yet begun. Down in the basement, Lucas finally reached a sealed room with a wooden table and a thick notebook. He opened the notebook. Each page was yellowed, filled with ancient characters and strange, inexplicable drawings. Suddenly, a scream rang out, not from within the room, but from deep within his mind. Lucas collapsed to the floor, eyes wide in horror. The scream, a sound that did not belong to this world, echoed everywhere, through the invisible wall that separated him and Evan. Evan stood outside, hearing the scream as well, his heart suddenly constricted. He knew that his friend was somewhere between life and death, and time was running out. Suddenly, all connections were gone. The phone signal went dead, the radio went silent. Evan called Lucas's name in vain. But there was only absolute silence in response. The darkness of the cellar was like a thick velvet blanket, cutting Lucas off from the outside world. He tried to stand, but his legs felt shackled, so heavy that every step was a struggle with himself. The space in the small room seemed to shrink with each second, and the symbols on the wall seemed to move, undulating with life, making him feel as if he were trapped inside a living creature. Lucas closed his eyes, trying to concentrate. The rhythmic double taps echoed in his head, an inescapable reminder. He realized that it wasn't just random noise, but a code, some ancient language he'd read about in the notebook, haunting lines that seemed to be trying to communicate something. He opened his eyes, staring at the symbols on the wall, trying to make a connection. Up above, Evan struggled with the feeling of being hunted. The flashlight in his hand shook, illuminating the thick fog outside. The odd geometrical arrangement of stones still lay there, but now they seemed to have spread out across the land, forming a mysterious network he couldn't understand. His heart clenched as he saw the blurry figures that passed by the window. The amber eyes became clearer, as if they were aimed at him, waiting for an opening to strike. But Evan knew that running away was not an option. He had to face something that had bound him not just by presence but by a deep connection he could not yet understand. Suddenly, a double knock sounded from the old broken radio in the house. Evan jumped, rushed to grab the radio and heard a weak voice, echoing from the past. "Don't believe it, it's not what it seems, they're coming." The voice trailed off, leaving only lingering echoes and gasps. Evan knew this was no coincidence. There was a hidden story, a forgotten truth deep in the history of this land, and he was touching it bit by bit. Lucas in the cellar now struggles not only with darkness but also with memories that slowly return, vague images of an ancient ritual, black visions of creatures in the darkness, and granite stones that appear as symbols of a broken covenant. He realizes that he is not the first person to be trapped in this labyrinth. The pages in the notebook reveal a terrifying secret: an ancient creature, sealed underground, now seeks to return to the human world, and the stones are a sign of its presence and power. Evan looked out at the sky, where the night was slowly giving way to a faint dawn. But he knew that the light of day could not dispel the darkness that was creeping into every corner of his soul. Something was coming closer, and this time, there was no place to hide. The faint light of dawn stretched across the damp ground, but inside Evan the darkness had never been so deep. The double knock echoed in his mind like a relentless alarm bell, haunting his every waking dream. He stood outside, looking down at the granite stones, arranged in a new spiral, larger and more complex, spreading out like a maze across the grass. Lucas, deep underground, felt the weight of space pressing down on him. The walls were covered in ancient symbols, as if trying to swallow him up into another world where time and space had no meaning. He knew he had to decipher the symbols to escape, but every time he tried, the knocking and breathing made his mind confused and disoriented. Evan found an old diary, buried in a pile of dust and old papers in the corner of the living room. The cover was worn, but the writing was still clear, the name of a man who had lived on this land more than a century ago. Evan began to read, the voice of the ancient narration slow, heavy with fear and suspicion of creatures that lived on the edge of the human world, hunters in the dark, and the appearance of mysterious circles as signs of uncontrollable forces. Meanwhile, Lucas discovered a small wooden door hidden at the end of the cellar. He opened it with force, revealing a secret room with an old altar covered in traces of a ghostly ritual. On the altar was a wooden box carved with strange patterns, inside were granite stones similar to the ones seen above. Lucas touched the stones with trembling hands, and a cold energy shot through his body, making him shiver. A vague image appeared in his mind, a giant creature, with burning amber eyes, lying underground, sealed by ancient rituals but now slowly awakening. Evan, after reading a few pages of the diary, understood that this land was once home to an ancient community, where they used granite stones as a tool to seal away a malevolent entity. But something had broken that seal, and now the stones were being deliberately placed back, not to keep it in, but to open it up again. At night, both Evan and Lucas felt a heavy presence in the air. Above ground, Evan heard whispers through the foliage, and unseen footsteps quietly approaching the house. Down in the basement, Lucas felt an invisible force trying to control his mind, pulling him into the depths of darkness. Just a few more steps, and all secrets will be revealed. But will they be able to escape the creatures waiting in the dark? Night had fallen like a thick black velvet blanket over the land. Evan stood on the porch, his eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the trees, where shadowy shapes moved silently like ghosts. The granite on the kitchen counter seemed cold and mysterious, as if it contained a will of its own, an unyielding force. In the dark cellar, Lucas felt a heavy pressure building up in his mind. The symbols on the wall urged him to find a way to open the wooden box, the key to escape or to sink deeper into the abyss. With trembling hands, he slowly lifted the lid. Inside was a shiny granite stone, so cold that it froze his blood. At that moment, a cold wind blew through the cellar, despite the closed door. A gasp came from somewhere nearby, not from a human but from an ancient creature, once sealed but now awakening. Lucas turned his head, eyes panicking in the dense darkness. Outside, Evan heard soft footsteps on the damp grass, close enough to hear the dry leaves rustling under his feet. He held his gun steady, but didn't dare move. Amber eyes glimmered in the darkness, staring straight into his soul, draining him of any remaining strength. Suddenly, a steady knock sounded, twice, then twice more, interspersed with restless footsteps. The knock was more than just a sound, it was like a call, a signal sent from another world, an invitation or a warning. Lucas tried to focus, recalling the words in the diary Evan had found. There was a story of an ancient ritual where stones were placed in complex geometry to seal a sleeping monster. But now that seal was being broken, and the creature's return could mean the end of everything. Evan sighed, feeling his body go cold, but he couldn't take his eyes off the darkness. He knew this was the moment of decision, between life and death, between the truth and the lies he had believed. The final knock sounded close to the ear, decisive and clear, like an ending, but at the same time the beginning of a terrifying journey no one had ever experienced. Darkness has fallen over the land, but Evan and Lucas are no longer alone. The granite stones, signs of ancient power, have been set in place, opening a portal to a world they never dared to believe existed. Lucas, standing in the cellar, felt a surge of intense energy coming from the stone in his hand. The characters on the wall glowed brightly like cold blue fire. The creature that had been dormant for so long began to stir, its deep sigh echoing through the stone layers. Evan was out there, his gaze strained toward the forest, feeling the amber eyes watching his every move. But he was no longer afraid. Instead, he felt determination and a simmering anger, determined not to let the creature destroy his land and his way of life. The two met at the border between light and darkness, where the line between reality and the supernatural became most blurred. They joined forces, using the knowledge from the diary and the symbols on the wall, to perform the final sealing ritual. The wind whistled through the cracks in the rocks, like the groans of a struggling creature. Under the dim moonlight, the granite stones emitted a cold light, forming a perfect network that locked the darkness. The double knocks rang out one last time, like a haunting farewell. When dawn broke, silence returned, but no one could forget what had happened. Evan and Lucas knew that the darkness was always there, just waiting for the right moment to return. They had survived, but the price was a haunting memory that would never fade. The story ends with Evan standing in front of his house, looking out into the woods, his eyes still searching the darkness, while the granite stones lie quietly on the table, like silent witnesses to a secret that should never be revealed. The night sky was suffocating, the cold wind blowing through the leaves carried the scent of damp earth and something else he couldn't name. Evan stood in front of the house, his hand clutching the gun, but deep inside he was filled with an unease he couldn't hide. The granite tiles on the kitchen counter glowed in the light, forming strange shapes whose meaning he still couldn't quite understand. Far away, deep in the forest, Lucas followed the remains of an ancient ritual. The flashlight beam cut through the mist, revealing deep gashes in tree trunks, streaks of dried blood, and giant footprints in the soft earth. Each step he took was a step into a sacred land of darkness, where life and death had no boundaries. The double knock, the incessant sound, was now everywhere, ringing in their ears like a prayer or a curse. Lucas could feel the presence growing closer, amber eyes flashing in the darkness like deadly torches. Evan heard a gasp outside, a heavy, aggressive breath. He turned, gun raised, waiting. The shadow passed like lightning, leaving a shiver of cold on his skin. Those eyes, bright, piercing, pierced his soul, leaving no room for negotiation. Lucas, in the heart of the jungle, opened the mysterious carved wooden box where the granite stone lay dormant. He felt an ancient power permeate his every fiber, an irresistible force awakening. An image flashed in his mind, an ancient creature, once sealed underground, now rising to reclaim its world. The two of them, on opposite sides of the world, were unaware that fate had bound them together and to this nameless darkness. And as the sky gave way to the first light of dawn, the real battle began. The sound of silence became deafening, the steady knocking sounded 3 times, a final warning before darkness enveloped all. The sky was fading to the pale gray of dawn, but the air was still heavy and cold, as if the light itself were afraid to touch this land. Evan stood in front of the house, rifle in hand, each breath of the cold air stretching the lines of his tired face. The granite tiles still lay on the kitchen counter, silent but powerful, as if counting down the last moments before darkness returned. Far in the woods, Lucas stood frozen before a locked wooden door. It was the entrance to an ancient vault where sealing rituals had once been performed. He sensed the presence of a force ready to erupt, powerful and uncontrollable. With trembling hands, he placed the granite stone on the sill and pulled from his pocket the journal, the only thing that might help him understand how to end this catastrophe. Suddenly, the knocking grew louder, no longer steady but fast and urgent, like the screams of an angry creature, wanting to break all limits. Evan heard it, felt it, his heart pounding as the giant shadow rushed from the forest. Sharp amber eyes flashed like blazing fire, staring straight at him. This is the end, Evan told himself, as he shivered not just from the cold but from a simmering panic. In the basement, Lucas began to read aloud the words in the diary, his voice echoing through the mysterious space, as if to prevent the revival of the dark force. The characters on the wall began to glow strongly, creating a circle of bright light surrounding the room. A cold wind blew, a long sigh lingering in the darkness like a death groan. The ancient creature, sealed away for centuries, gradually emerged as a gigantic figure, both mysterious and terrifying, with sharp claws and burning amber eyes. Evan firmly grasped his gun, stepping into the boundary between light and darkness, ready to fight to the last breath. Lucas, also standing firmly in the circle of light of the ritual, clearly felt that this was not just a fight for their lives, but a fight to keep humanity from the abyss. The final knock sounded, 3 times, as decisive and powerful as a death knell. Darkness collided with light, and for a split second, everything seemed to stop. When dawn broke, there was only an eerie silence. The granite on the kitchen counter no longer glowed, but lay there silently, like silent witnesses to the past war. Evan and Lucas looked at each other through the mist, both breathing a sigh of relief, but their eyes still haunted by what they had just experienced. They knew the darkness never completely disappeared, it just retreated, waiting, silent and patient. And so, the story ends not with an end, but with the beginning of another journey, a journey to face the ghosts in the mind and the mysterious forces out there.